Buenas tardes, gente. Buenas tardes a este 10º programa, este festejo, gran festejo de lo que es este programa hermoso que logramos llevar adelante, que es Protagonistas del Cómic. Obviamente, como siempre, está acá mi compañero Mario.
Los abrazo a todos a la distancia, Kyle, a vos también. Obviamente, hermano mío, esto es una locura lo que vamos a vivir y la verdad que nos pusimos la 10 en esta.
Increíble, Mario, como decíamos siempre, se viene 10º programa, 10 programas adentro, 10 comic creators adentro,
Adentro.
y el 10º que es la frutillita del postre, ¿no?
Sí, el mejor, por favor.
Ok. Bueno, ahora vamos a empezar a hablar en inglés, así que sin más, I'm going to introduce our guest for Protagonista del Cómic 10, the one and only JM De Matteis.
Hey guys. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Such an honor.
Very happy to be here and talk to you guys.
Such an honor. Such an honor.
It's an honor.
We are so thrilled to have you here and speak with you. And you have a huge fan base here in Argentina.
Yes.
It's like a dream come true here. Have you here, speak with you.
Yes, sir, you have a very big fan base also, and thank you so much for everything you gave us. With all your partners, of course.
Right? Of course. We'll talk about those guys, hopefully, as we go along, yeah?
Yeah, I think for most of the Argentinian comic book fans, you were just the initiation course to the comic books. Because most of the actual comic book readers begin with your JLA run. So I think it's an important thing.
You know, it's one of those things. When you're working on something, you're never thinking that you're going to be talking about that something 30 years later. You know what I mean? You're lucky if you're talking about it 30 minutes later. So, you know, we sat down, to work on this series back then. It was just really, truly, it was just another job at the time. And little did we know that not only would the book live on, but that the relationships between me and Keith and Kevin, would go on through all these years, and we would continue to work together on different projects. And then it became something so much bigger than anything we ever imagined at the time. To me, it was another job. It was a fun job, but it was just another job,
Yeah.
So, Mr. Wild,
No, Mr. De Matteis.
My wife.
Whoops.
My wife. Just, Mr. De Matteis, to start the interview, I would like to tell us about how you got into the comic book business.
How I got into the business. Okay. Yeah. I always, probably like both you guys and most of the people watching this, I always loved comics. I don't remember a time as a little kid when I wasn't reading comics. Somehow they were always around and they were always available, and I loved them. And when I was young, I was very much into art. So I spent a good part of my childhood on my living room floor with a comic book cover there and a piece of paper and pencils and crayons, drawing what I was seeing in the comic books. And at an age when, some people went on and stopped reading comic books and moved on to other things, I always continued to read them, even while I was discovering, great literature and getting into music, because I'm also a musician and playing in bands and doing all these other things. My love for comics was always there, and my love for writing was always there. So I knew that writing comics was something that I would love to do at some point in my life. I also knew that it wasn't the only thing I wanted to do. I wanted to write many different things, and happily in my career, I've had the opportunity to write many different things, but it was a goal for me. So at a certain point in my life, it was right around the time I'd been playing in bands. The band I was in broke up. I had kind of made a shift over to music journalism, so I was writing reviews of concerts and albums and doing interviews in music journalism, but I always wanted to do comics. And I had made a few attempts when I was a teenager and sent some work into Marvel and DC and didn't get anywhere, which at that point in my life, I shouldn't have, because I just wasn't there yet. But at one point, I just sent a letter of inquiry and some writing samples to DC. And they said, basically, we're looking for stories. Back in those days, they had the anthology comics like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, Weird War Tales, things like that. Comics that I had never even heard of. I didn't read them, you know. But they said that then was where new writers broke into the business. So I immediately went out and bought a bunch of copies of those comics to see what it was. And Paul Levitz was the editor of those books in those days. So, and Paul he's probably 2 years younger than me and had been in the business since high school. He started working at DC when he was still in high school. Brilliant guy. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Did you know Mr. Levitz before the comics?
No, I knew. Although I grew up in Brooklyn, and he grew up in Brooklyn, and we even would buy our comics at the same place. But we didn't know each other. We didn't know each other at all. I didn't know anything about the business. I didn't know anybody in the business. I was a working class kid from Brooklyn. The idea of even how do you go about selling this stuff was so way beyond me. So I just did what you did in those days, was I wrote a letter, and you hoped that someone would respond to it, and they did.
So, Mr. De Matteis quoting Captain America. So they were two boys from Brooklyn.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So basically, long story very short, I pitched Paul, but I still have the letter, the original letters. I sent Paul like a batch of story ideas. He wrote back to me and just tore my stories to pieces. I mean, even criticized my typing. He didn't like my typing because I was crossing things out and writing things in the margins. He didn't like the stories. But at the bottom, he wrote, "Feel free to submit again."
Oh my.
And the big lesson, if you're a creative person who wants to make it in the world, is, you know, when you get rejected, when you get criticized, you know, you're going to feel it. So I always say, go crawl under your desk and cry for half an hour, bang your head against the wall, curse God, and then get up and write something else. And all I really saw was submit again. So the door may have been closed halfway, but it wasn't closed 100%. Yeah, right. So I kept submitting more stuff to him. And then finally, I made an appointment, since I lived in New York City, to go into Manhattan, where DC was, and have a face-to-face meeting with him. And I pitched him a few ideas. And finally, he found one that he liked. Mm-hmm. And long story short, we worked on that story together. He bought it, and that was my first story that I ever sold. And what was that? It was to House of Mystery. It was a story called, prepare yourself. The story was called The Lady Killer Craves Blood. It was a vampire story. And you know, the amazing thing about those books was, I don't think even DC knew who were the people that were reading those books or buying them, but somehow they sold. So it wasn't like you were suddenly, you know, making your debut writing Justice League or Superman. They were little 5 to 8 page stories. And it was a great way to learn your craft, because in 5, yeah, there you go. That's the first story I ever sold. That's it. It wasn't the first one. Wasn't the first one that came out, but it was the first one that I ever sold. But it was a great way. And you had 5 to 8 pages to tell a complete story with a complete plot, with a character arc. You had, you know what I mean? You had to really learn the whole craft of writing comics in this very, very short, abbreviated form. So from that, I sold them a lot of stuff. And I learned so much from Paul. And then what happened was, if you guys have heard of it, there was the famous DC implosion. So I sold them some stories for about 6 months, and then DC had these huge cutbacks. This was 1977, believe it or not, a long time ago. And so the first people to go were people like me, who were like, I was just on the fringe. I was of no importance to that company. You know what I mean? I was a new guy who had just sold them, 8 or 10 stories or whatever it was at that point. And what's funny was, just before the DC implosion, I sold my first full-length story to Weird War Tales. It was a 22-page story, and they gave me a page rate increase. And in those days, you know, now it's laughable. I think I was being paid $13 a page. They raised it to $15 a page, and it was a 22-page story. I lived off that money for the whole summer after that. You know? It was enough to pay my share of the rent and go buy a slice of pizza. You know what I mean? It was like I was okay. I was okay for 2 months just from that one check for what $300 whatever that it was. You know, and so then for like 6 or 8 months, I didn't get any work. I think it was 8 months. I didn't get any work out of DC. And I was also trying to make inroads at Marvel at the same time, you know, trying to get, but I was also a journalist. So what I was doing also, I wrote some journalism pieces about comics. So that got me in over at Marvel. I got to meet Jim Shooter and interview him. I went back and interviewed Paul and other editors. And then things started to open up again about 8 months or a year later. And I started getting work from them again. There was an anthology series called Time Warp that they started, that Jack Harris edited. It was science fiction anthology. I started selling stories there. And then the great Len Wein came on staff at DC, and he was editing those anthologies that Paul had been editing. I started working with Len, and we really hit it off. He became my mentor, my dear friend. He was the guy that said, you know, you're not just another person coming through my office. You have something special, and I want to help you. I want to help you to expand and grow as a writer. But all those guys did. I continued to work with Paul, Jack Harris, Len Wein. They all taught me so much. I call it it was my comic book college. That's where I learned all the basics. And in those days, so then you'd be working on those anthology books, and then they'd move you on. So I started writing Red Tornado. Again, they were 8-page features, like in World's Finest and Adventure Comics. I did Aquaman, also an 8-page feature. I did Hawkman. And then I got to write my first full-length superhero story, which was an issue of Brave and the Bold teaming up Batman and Hawkman. You know, and that was, oh my God, how am I going to fill up 22 pages when I've been writing, you know, 8-page stories, you know? And so, you know, it just progressed from there. And along the way, I also started selling some stories to Marvel. You know, Jim Shooter always liked to have fill-ins. He always liked to have an issue in the drawer so that if somebody screwed up, they could slot that story in. So
Yes.
I started selling fill-in stories to Marvel, you know, and then eventually, you know, I was doing my work at DC, and then Jim Shooter, about a year after that, offered me a contract at Marvel, an exclusive contract, which allowed me to be a freelancer, but have a guaranteed income, which was a great thing because we all like to make a living and pay the rent. So I went from I had a choice to make because Len offered me the job to be an assistant editor at DC and be his assistant. And I loved Len, and I loved working with him, whereas Marvel offered me this freelance contract. And my son this is 1980, my son had just been born. And I had to make a decision, which one am I going to take? What a great decision to have to make. Am I going to be Len Wein's assistant or get a contract at Marvel? But because I wanted to be home and help in the raising of my son, I decided to take the gig at Marvel. But then since then, I've been going back and forth between all the different companies, and I went back to DC eventually, and you know, went back to Marvel and then back to DC, or I worked for both of them at the same time. And I've worked for like all the, you know, so many companies over the years. So I always say that the most important part in the word freelancer is free. You're free to make your own decisions. And if you don't like what's going on over there, then go over there. And if you don't like what's going on over there, then find another company to work for. And so I feel very, very lucky in that I've always worked at home. I've always been here for my family. I was here to raise both my kids. And I got to work in a business that I love. I feel very blessed. I feel very blessed.
Thank you for that, because it's an honor for us to read these magnificent stories, because we grew up with these, and it's very touching for us, for me, and for him, and for our generation, because here in Argentina, we discover all these characters thanks to you. Thank you, your stories. So
thank you.
It's very touching. I remember when Jose Garcia Lopez came to Argentina, and we grew up with the Justice League Kenner action figures and many things, and they were their art, and he couldn't believe the love from the people.
I find it's amazing when I get to go to international conventions. We were talking a little bit about this before we got started here. I forget. I spend most of my time in a room by myself, making up stories, playing with my imaginary friends, and you forget that there are readers out there. that are reading these stories and that it matters to them and it touches them. And then you go to another country and you discover that, you know, across the world, people have been reading this material and it means something to them. It's touched their heart. It's made them happy, whatever it is. You can't put a price on that. It's fantastic. And I find that's why I really love the international conventions, because I find consistently in whatever country I go to, people are so warm and so welcoming and so appreciative. They treat us like family, you know, and it's really, really sweet. And I I don't take that for granted. I really appreciate it.
Mr. Matteis, also, I would like to say that I was amazed what a versatile writer you are, because you write such cool stories and funny stories, and then you go grim and greedy with others, and it's incredible that it's the same person that writes everything. And when I realized, when reading a comic book, and read De Matteis, and the first thing I thought was, I can't believe this guy, the same guy who wrote this funny comic book is the same man who wrote this. And I'm speaking about, I don't know, for example, some books in Marvel that you wrote, The Defenders, Captain America, Marvel Team Up, and other cool comic books that it really says a lot about who you are and how you work.
Yeah, you know, I've tried over the years. You know, you don't want to ever be just one thing or do just one thing. You know, and at first it wasn't conscious on my part, but it's just I kind of did it naturally. You want to be as diverse as possible in the kinds of stories that you tell and the kinds of genres that you work in, so that, you know, I've done the mainstream superhero stuff. You know, got tons of Spider-Man stuff at Marvel and superhero stuff at DC, but I've done lots of excuse me, creator-owned work. You know, so many creator-owned series over the years that I've worked on. I've done autobiographical comics. I've done comics specifically for an all-ages audience, and of course, all the more humorous-leaning stuff that I've done with Giffen, the serious psychological stuff, the spiritual stuff. And I realized early on that in order to keep myself interested, I have to switch it up. If all I had done was, like, say, stay at Marvel and just do superheroes, I might have jumped out the window, you know, at a certain point. But because even when I was at Marvel, I was working for, you know, doing the Epic line, doing Moonshadow for Epic, you know, and then I went on and worked for Vertigo and did lots of things for Vertigo and on, you know, up to, you know, last year when I worked for Karen Berger at Berger Books on a new series called The Girl in the Bay. So you have to be diverse. And then I moved into television and film, and I've written novels, and you have to do that. At least I have to do that, because it keeps it interesting. And that's why after doing it for so many years, I can still be excited about it, because I don't know what the next project is going to be. It could be anything.
Mr. Matteis, since you mentioned Moonshadow, can you tell us about the working process of Moonshadow with John Muth?
Sure.
How did you come up this idea of I think it's the first painted comic book.
The first fully painted, at least in America, the first fully painted comic book. It's funny that you put up Into Shambhala, because Dan Green was an important part of what happened with Moonshadow. Dan and I were friends. I'd had the Moonshadow idea running around in my head for like a number of years. Last year, I don't know if they reprinted it down there yet, but last year, Dark Horse put out a beautiful hardcover edition of Moonshadow called Moonshadow, the Definitive Edition. And in the back, I went through all my files and found all my original notes and Muth found his character sketches, just great things that we filled this book with. I hope it comes out there if it hasn't. So I'd been playing with this idea for the longest time, and I had pitched it to Jim Shooter at Marvel, and he said, well, that's clearly an Epic comic. So he sent me over to Archie Goodwin, who was running the Epic line, another great editor and a great guy. Shooter also was someone who was very important in my career and helped me tremendously. And I was looking for an artist, and I didn't know. I had a lot of different guys in mind. And, you know, with comics, it ain't just the story. It's got to be that union of story and art. And who the artist is really can change how the story is. So if I had gotten a more traditional artist to work on Moonshadow, it might not have impacted me the same way. It might not have challenged me the same way. So what happened was I was talking to Dan Green. I had given Dan Green my outline, my proposal for Moonshadow. He was friends with John Muth. He passed it over to John, who read it and fell in love with it. And Dan introduced us, and we met and we started talking, and we just clicked right from the start. He's aside from being
you connect with those guys. So,
you know, so writers and artists, it's the same way, you know, the same way with just when you meet somebody, you walk in, you go to a party, you meet somebody and you talk to them for a while and there's no connection. And then you talk to somebody else and you're instantly best friends, you know? It's the same thing creatively. Sometimes people just click. I've had artists that I click with that I've never even met them, but just when we work together, something magical happens, you know? And that's what happened with Muth. And his art, he was in his early 20s, I think, at the time. And he was one of the most brilliant artists. Like, he just came out fully formed, you know? And he's only gotten better over the years. So on Moonshadow, I couldn't write it in a traditional way when I had an artist like this, who could paint like this and bring things to life in that way. So his art challenged me. My story challenged him to do things he had never done before in his art. And we both grew together. And so Moonshadow became, for me, really the series that helped me really completely find myself as a writer. You know, before, you know, I'm working in the Marvel Universe and I'm doing my very best, and I think I did good work. But you're working within sort of a structure. This is what a mainstream comic book is. And whether the structure is self-imposed or from an editor, it doesn't matter. A lot of it, I think, is self-imposed. But by doing Moonshadow, it had nothing to do with the Marvel Universe, nothing to do with the DC Universe. I was like I was writing a novel. I was creating it from the ground up and writing it in just the way I wanted to write it. And it freed me as a writer. I look back at it even now and I go, how did I do this? I don't know where this came from, you know? But a lot of it was the chemistry between me and Muth. You know, all you have to do is look at that beautiful art and it stimulates something in my mind, and I'm writing the story in a very different way than I would have written it with a different artist. So that series means so much to me. That's why I was so happy when they put out this new edition, because it's the nicest edition we've seen so far. So I don't know who publishes this stuff there, but if they should get in touch with Dark Horse if they haven't printed it already and get it out in Argentina. Yeah.
We need it. We need it.
I think it's Utopia, Mario. Utopia.
Utopia? Okay. An editorial called Utopia here in Argentina. So we have to call them. So Utopia.
You have to call them. Utopia. I'm bringing it.
Well, we'll just tell them right now. Hey, put it out. Get it out there right now.
Utopia, te lo dijo ellos.
De Matteis. Mr. Matteis, also, Moonshadow was published by two editorials. One was, I think it was Paradox.
No, it started out at Marvel at Epic Comics. That was the first place.
Epic Comics.
And then about 10 years later, we got the rights back from Marvel and Vertigo put it out.
Yeah.
Then we did a sequel called Farewell Moonshadow. And they collected that all together. Yeah, we did. The sequel was for Vertigo.
And the sequel for Vertigo helped launch the CEO of Vertigo.
No, I don't think it was part of the Vertigo launch. No, it came a little bit later. I did a book called Mercy for Vertigo, which was that was part of the Vertigo launch. So I was there from like the start with Vertigo. Karen Berger is one of my oldest and dearest friends. We were friends before either one of us worked in the comic book business, and we're still dear friends today. So, so it was great to be a part of that. You know, it was great to be a part of Epic when that was starting. To be part of Vertigo, I did Brooklyn Dreams for Paradox Press. That was my autobiographical series about being a crazy teenager. So to be part of all these different imprints that were really kind of expanding the language of American comics, I was very, very glad to be a part of all that. But Vertigo was something very special, yeah.
And we had to pass we have to move on to the big parts of the interview for most of the subscribers.
And also
And
the chat
it's
is asking for it.
the chat is on fire. Thank you that you're the best. You're the best. Here's a question I would like to ask you that comes from one of the subscribers. It says, if you can tell us about your relationship with Sal Buscema.
Oh, I'd love to. You know what I was talking about before about chemistry between a writer and an artist?
Yeah.
So I had worked with Sal. He had done some, you know, like when I was writing Captain America, there were a couple of issues that Mike Zeck couldn't do, so Sal filled in. Same thing on Marvel Team Up, an issue here, an issue there. I always liked his work. But then when I took over Spectacular Spider-Man, Sal was the artist on that. And that's when I talk about the magic of collaboration. Because from the very first issue we worked on together, from the very first panel, something clicked. He would read my scripts and something clicked in his head, and I looked at his art, and this chemical reaction happened. I loved working with Sal. He can, first of all, he really knows how to draw. His storytelling is impeccable and clear. Everything I ask for in a plot or a script is there. All the emotions, all the action, it's so clear and so powerful that those 2 years that we worked together on Spectacular Spider-Man, some of my favorite stuff that I've ever done, some of my favorite Spider-Man stories that I've ever done. And I keep waiting. I know it's been collected in other countries. It's never been collected in the United States, all these years later. So I keep waiting and hoping that one day I'll wake up and read the solicits and see that they finally collected it. Because I never find out about these things until they're coming out, you know? So I loved working with Sal. Not only is he just a great artist, he's a really good person. So he was just a wonderful person to work with, a true gentleman, you know? And yes. When I get, you know, getting to work with the people that say when I was growing up reading their work, and suddenly, you know, that these are like artists like Sal that I looked up to, and suddenly I was working with them. That was really a thrill to work with someone like that. And to find out that he's not only is he just a great artist, he's a great man, you know? It was really something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And speaking of Spider-Man, as I told you, we gotta speak about this jewel. Actually, it's a jewel that endured through the years, and it's for me, it's a masterwork you did with Mike Zeck.
Yes.
I have to confess something to you, Mr. De Matteis.
Okay.
I read the story when I was in a bus, raining, and I read the whole story in a bus during a vacation. So it was amazing for me. It was an experience I'll never forget.
Oh, that's great. That's great. You know, kind of going back to what I said before, you never know when you're working on something that you're going to be talking about it 30 years later, because sometimes the story that you really love, no one ever mentions again, and some story you don't expect, you know, it becomes a big hit and you're talking about it years later. So, you know, we're working on that, and it was like, all right, I'm trying to tell as good a story as I can, never dreaming that Marvel would be reprinting this thing for 30 years in different editions, and I'd be sitting here talking to you about it today. I'm always amazed that, you know, when I go to conventions, it's like a third of what I sign probably at conventions is Kraven's Last Hunt. A third of what I sign is probably Justice League International. And a third is everything else, you know? But to tie this all together, I could have never written Kraven had I not done Moonshadow first. Because by doing Moonshadow, I stepped out of the Marvel Universe. I found myself as a writer. I expanded my language. You know, I expanded the parameters of what I thought a comic book story could do, so that when I stepped back in to work on Kraven, which really started right around the time that Moonshadow ended, I was able to write that story in a way I could never have written it before, because I worked on Moonshadow. Yeah.
Mr. Matteis, is it true that you pitched this story to DC for Batman?
It is true. I always talk about the fact that, and I really believe this, that stories are alive. They have lives of their own. You know, the story picks me to tell it, but the story exists separately in another universe somewhere, you know? And so I had this idea. Believe it or not, the original idea I had was for a Wonder Man. You remember Wonder Man, the Marvel character?
Yeah.
I had this idea for a Wonder Man story. It was Wonder Man and the Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper kills Wonder Man and buries him alive. And I pitched that to Tom DeFalco. This has got to be 3 or 4 years before I ever did Kraven, maybe even more. And he went, I don't like it. So thank God he didn't like it. And so, but I like this idea of the hero coming back from the grave. You know, there was something about that image and, you know, the hand jutting up from the grave and that whole thing. So I thought about it and I reworked it as a Batman story. And it involved Batman and the Joker. And the Joker kills Batman, buries him alive. But the Joker, now that he's killed Batman, his life has no more meaning. So his mind snaps. But he's already crazy. So he goes sane. So it's a whole story about the Joker going sane. Batman comes back. Years later, I held on to that idea, and I did it for Legends of the Dark Knight. I did a story called Batman Going Sane, which is one of my favorite stories that I've ever done. So anyway, I pitched this story to, I think it was Len Wein was editing the Batman books at the time. Right around the time that I pitched it, they were just starting to work on the Killing Joke. And the Joker elements in my story and the Joker elements in Alan Moore's story, Len felt were kind of similar. So he said, no, he couldn't do my story. So off you go. And this is another lesson as a writer. Never throw your ideas away. Because I've had stories, it takes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years before the story ever comes out. You keep working on it, working on it, working on it. So I go away, a year goes by, or a year and a half, whatever it is, and now Denny O'Neil is editing the Batman books. So I said, okay, I'm not going to put the Joker. I threw out the Joker, saved that idea for later, and I used Hugo Strange. And that's where the idea of the villain putting on the hero's costume, and after he kills him, trying to be a better Batman. And this is so long ago that my memory is that Denny's answer was this. I pitched it as a Batman graphic novel. They were only doing like 1 or 2 graphic novels a year. He said, we've already got our Batman graphic novel for this year. Come back next year, basically. So I put the story away again. And now time goes by, another year or whatever it was, and I got a call from Marvel that I went out to with Tom DeFalco, and I think Jim Owsley was editing the Spider-Man books, who you know as Christopher Priest, but he was Jim Owsley back then. And they took me out to lunch, and they said, hey, do you want to write a Spectacular Spider-Man? And we're going to get Mike Zeck to draw it. Now, Mike and I had already worked together on Captain America, and I loved working with Mike. It doesn't get better than Mike Zeck, just phenomenal artist. Just like Sal, great artist, great person. Why would you not want to work with this guy, So I thought, here's my chance to finally get this story out. So I went back.
So I put this here.
Yes. But here's the great thing, what I mean about the story having a life of its own. Had I done those other versions of the story, they wouldn't have been as good. You know what I mean? Because all these different elements were working together, and my life was changing too. And unfortunately for me, and fortunately for the story, at the time when I took over that book, I was having a very difficult time in my life. And all that struggle and all that pain that you see Peter go through, and Kraven go through, and Vermin go through, that all came from my own pain and struggle at that time. And I think that's one of the reasons why the story has lasted, and maybe one of the reasons why I don't like to go back and reread it, because it's so evocative of the struggle that I was going through in my life. And so I had this Hugo Strange idea, so I thought, oh, I'll create my own version of Hugo Strange to be in the story. So it wasn't Kraven yet. I created this other villain, and I don't even have any memory of who he was. And the editor said, great, let's do it. And one day I was sitting in my office, and, before the age of the internet, when, the internet is a great place to waste time when you don't want to work. Well, there was no internet to waste time. So I was sitting in my office just flipping through some comics to waste time. So you're always avoiding the work at least you have to avoid it for a while before you dive in. At least I do. I go through this. It's kind of, I always say writers, when you have a dog and the dog will walk in circles before it lays down. Yes. That's my process. I go through circles to let my unconscious mind work on the story, and then I get to work. But the hard work is the walking in circles. Anyway, so I picked up this random Marvel Universe handbook, and there was something about Kraven there. And one of the things it said, which I had never heard, was that Kraven was originally from Russia. And I love Dostoevsky. I love Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov and The Idiot and all these great Russian novels. And something just clicked in my head, and I went like, the heck with this other villain. All of a sudden, I never even liked Kraven. I thought he was a dumb villain, And suddenly I read this thing, and something clicked in my brain, and I called the editor up and said, forget the new villain I created. We're going to use Kraven. And he was like, but I like the other villain, and we're going to use Kraven. And the whole story just came together. And all these things, all these kind of accidents, Peter and Mary Jane had just gotten married, you know, in the comics, which added so much more emotion to the story. You know, if he was crawling out of that grave to get to his girlfriend, it's one thing. But if he's crawling out of the grave to get to his wife, who he just married, that adds like 100% to the emotional arc. He was in the black costume in those days. That story, you know, the black costume added so much to the story. And then because Mike and I had worked on Captain America together, I thought that we needed another villain to contrast Kraven's version of Spider-Man and Peter's version of Spider-Man. And Mike and I had created Vermin together. So because Mike was there, I pulled in Vermin. So all these elements, my personal life, Peter getting married, the black costume, Vermin, it all, Kraven, finding Kraven completely by accident, you know, all these quote accidents came together at the right time to make that story work, you know. And I always say that for a comic book to work, every element has to work. So it doesn't matter if I wrote the greatest story in the world. If I didn't have Mike Zeck drawing that story, if Bob McLeod wasn't inking Mike, you know, even the lettering was so important to that story. The coloring, all those elements came together and it all worked and it all gelled and it made something really special.
You know,
even if,
Matteis,
yeah, yes.
the thing you did with the characters, especially with Peter, well, Spider-Man, when he went to the funeral from the guy that burglar, it's very touching because he gave them to the funeral.
Oh, the
money for the funeral.
Right, the Joe Face, the little criminal that, yeah, who I think I had created him when I was writing Marvel Team Up. I had him as a little subsidiary character there.
Yeah.
And yeah. You know, sometimes stories, people ask me to explain them, and sometimes the stories just come out, and the story takes control. You know, it's like you're riding a horse, and the horse just starts galloping on its own, and you have a choice to try to control the horse or follow it. And the Kraven story, you know, just kind of galloped along, and I followed it where it led me. So it wasn't, you know, sometimes there are very conscious decisions that go into a story, and sometimes it's all from the unconscious, and it just flows out. And Kraven had a lot of that to it. But what I wanted to say is, you know, one of the reasons why I think that story works is because of there's a lot of internal stuff. It's all in the characters' heads. It's not just, you know, there are thoughts and there are counter thoughts and there are thoughts below that counter those thoughts. And I could have never done that if not for Mike Zeck, because Mike Zeck is such a superb artist that if I gave him the plot, and we worked Marvel style, so I wrote a detailed plot, he draws it, and then I put in the final scripting after I get the artwork. When Mike draws a story, all the action is clear. You can take all the words out of Kraven's Last Hunt and follow the action. You can also look at the characters' faces and see the basic emotion. You know what they're feeling in that basic moment. So sometimes what happens is you get the artwork back and it's not clear. So the script is all about, you know, I'm going to pick a ridiculous example. A character is fighting with another villain on the roof and he trips over something and he falls off the roof. If the art isn't clear, the writer has to go and write something like, whoops, I tripped over that and I'm falling off the roof now, you know? You never have to do that with Mike Zeck. That's all clear. So because the art was so clear, I could spend the whole time inside the characters' heads. I didn't have to explain anything that was in the action. It was all clear. If another artist had drawn it, I might have had to explain the action, and I never would have gone down deep to those other layers of the story. So if Mike had never drawn that story, even if I had written every word the same way, I don't think we would be talking about it today. It goes back to what I said about chemistry. There's a chemistry between the writer and the artist that is unique. And Mike and I had that chemistry, and McLeod had that chemistry with Mike, and Rick Parker, the letterer, you know, and then here, talk about accidents. Our editor finally, Jim Owsley left, and Jim Salicrup took over as editor. And it was Jim's idea. Jim was the one that said, you can't have Spider-Man buried alive in one book and fighting Dr. Octopus in another book. Let's have this story run through all 3 Spider-Man titles for 2 months. That was Jim's idea. No one had ever done that before, and I give him all the credit in the world. And that also added to the impact of the story. You know, you weren't waiting for next month and then going and reading another Spider-Man adventure in another book. You were immersed in that story for 2 months. And I think that also added to its impact.
Also, the story is so different to any other Spider-Man story because the the theme of the story was as you said, it was so psychological, focusing on the psychology of the characters more than the action. And one thing that I've always wondered when I read the story, it was why Kraven end with his life. Is he fulfilling his destiny? Is he fulfilling his purpose in life? What was the point of Kraven ending his life?
Right. You know, it's interesting because, like I said, sometimes the story tells themselves, and the characters lead you. Kraven led me to that ending. I didn't decide, oh, I'm going to have Kraven kill himself. Kraven reached that point in the story and in his own psychology where that's what he did. But I think it becomes clear as you're reading the story that he is a very damaged, mentally imbalanced person. He has created this whole image of the spider, all the pain from his childhood, all the insanity. His mother died in a mental institution, and it's one of his great fears: is he going to go insane like his mother? And his last words before he kills himself, they said, "My mother was insane," and then he kills himself. That was to make clear to people this was not some noble choice. This was a terrible choice that he made to end his life that way. Some people have read the story and think, oh, that was a great ending for Kraven. He did what he wanted to do, and he just was. No, that wasn't a noble choice. That was a tragic choice. And so he had taken all of this pain and struggle of his life, and he created in his own head the spider, and he projects that all onto Peter. You know, not knowing that Spider-Man is just some kid, just like him, trying to struggle and get along in life. You know, and so on one part in his mind, he thinks he's done it. He's proven himself. He's better than the spider. You know, and my life is complete. But the other side of it is he's mentally ill. And, you know, this entire journey that he's gone on has been in his own deranged mind, so that his suicide is a complete tragedy. And we did a sequel called Soul of the Hunter.
Yeah.
Because Peter is the kind of person, you know, his motivating factor 9 out of 10 times is guilt. You know what I mean? He's guilty about Uncle Ben, and it drives everything he does. So think about poor Peter. You know, he stops Kraven a moment. He goes off to stop Vermin because he knows Vermin's going to go out there and slaughter people. And then when he comes back, he finds out that Kraven has taken his own life. So the Peter's the kind of person that's going to think, what could I have done? Even though this guy is his enemy, what could I have done to have stopped that, to have saved him? So I used that Soul of the Hunter story to put Peter through that. And also because, you know, there were some people that thought that the suicide was like glorifying suicide, which is the farthest thing from my mind. You know, that is not what that ending was about. So I wanted also to make it clear that what Kraven did was a tragedy. There was nothing honorable in what he did. In his own deranged mind, it might have been honorable, but not in reality.
For me, this is about the story, and also for me, when I have interpreted the story, when I read it, when he talked about his family and his legacy in Russia. We are talking in an era in the 80s, ending in the early 80s, that the Russia that Russia is going to disappear.
Long gone. Yes. And the idea was that he had used all these jungle potions to extend his life. So he was very old, actually, very old. You know, because he had been, you know, he was a little kid during the Russian Revolution. You know, so yes, yeah, he was an old man really, but he had kept himself young with all these magic potions and things that he played with.
I'm looking for a question that I read about Kraven, and one of the subscribers did.
Mr. De Matteis, before that, you wrote some scripts for Kraven for the television series, from the animation in '95.
Not with Kraven.
And with Kraven.
Okay. No, it wasn't. I've done a lot of animation over the years, tons of animation. It's been a big part of my career. But I would love to do Kraven's Last Hunt. I've written a lot of the DC animated movies. You know, I would love to do a Kraven's Last Hunt animated movie. I think it would be phenomenal. I would love to do that.
And how different is to work a script for a comic book and to work a screenplay for an animation series?
It's well, here what's the same is story is story. A good story is a good story, whether you're expressing it in a comic book, in a novel, in an episode of a TV show, in a full-length movie, whatever it is. But when you're working in television, so just, Kraven's Last Hunt, I had this idea, they let me do it. I don't think they changed a word in my scripts in Kraven's Last Hunt. There's a lot of freedom, even working in mainstream comics. It's just you, the editor, and the artist, really, and it can still be a very pure vision. When you're working in television, and I've loved my experiences working in television, we'll pick something like Justice League Unlimited, which is a show I wrote a lot of episodes for that I loved working on. But they've got a staff of producers and staff writers and all this stuff. So they've got a whole season worked out, and they come to me with a story idea. They say, this is what we need for this week. They give me the basics of a story that I have to then go off and develop. So I have two jobs there. My job one is to meet their expectations for what they need for their series, because I'm a freelancer. I'm writing this episode. I'm not there next week. They're still there next week developing their season. Even if I'm writing 4 episodes that season, there could be 15 episodes that season. So I have to please them and give them what they're looking for. But I also have to do what I do with any other story, which is bring as much of myself to the story and the uniqueness of my own point of view. So it's a challenge, but it's also, there's more collaboration in a lot of ways going on. Sometimes I'm working on these animated movies, and I'm working with a producer and the director. Sometimes there's also network notes. So there might be, sometimes you're getting notes from 3, 4, 5 people, and you have to kind of please everybody and yet please yourself at the same time. But I enjoy the collaboration because I spend most of my time alone in this room. So it's nice to have, when I'm working on the DC animated stuff and you're working with guys like Bruce Timm and Jim Krieg and Alan Burnett and James Tucker and, these wonderful directors, and you get on the phone. So, like last year or the year before, I did an adaptation of Superman Red Sun. We did the movie version of that. Yes. So, I spent a lot of time with the producer, Jim Krieg, and with Bruce Timm on the phone. Oh, there's a whole bunch of those movies. Yeah. Great. You're prepared. You're prepared for everything.
Yeah, we're prepared.
I would get on the phone with Bruce and Jim, and we'd be on the phone for 90 minutes just talking about the story. What are we going to keep in? What are we going to leave out? How do we work this in? Do we need this element? And, there's all this talking going on with two other guys who really are great writers in their own right, so that it's really fun for me to get on the phone with these guys. And then I go off and I write my draft. I come back, they give me notes, and it usually goes through at least 4 drafts of the script before it's done. But I love working with those guys. Anything that comes up from Warner Animation, from those guys, I jump at, because I don't even care what the character is, because I just love working with them.
Since you mentioned that you love some Russian authors, when I heard you, I remember Red Sun, and I said, Mr. De Matteis would have been delighted when he got the chance to write this screenplay.
Yeah, it was a challenge too. I didn't realize until I started working on it just how much people love that story. It's really revered, Yeah. And I've had 2 times where that's happened. My first episode of Justice League Unlimited that I did was Alan Moore's For the Man Who Has Everything, which people have that story on a pedestal, and the same thing with Red Sun. So it's a great challenge to adapt those stories, and I hope in both cases that we did honor those stories. We tried very much to, and I think we did a good job with it. Yeah, adaptation is an interesting thing, when you have to figure out what do you keep, because you're taking something like with Red Sun, just an epic story with so many amazing imaginative elements in it. Every page is filled with great ideas, every page. But you have a 90-minute movie, and you have to I always said it's like you have this giant redwood tree, and you have to whittle it down until it's like a beautiful bush or something. But you have to have the essence of that story in there, So what I've learned over the years is it's not about the details of the story. It's capturing the heart and soul of the story that's really, really important. You can keep all the details and miss the core of what the story is about. you know? So with Red Sun, I hope we kept the core of that. I also recently did it's on the Batman Death in the Family DVD, a short, a 20-minute short with Neil Gaiman's death character. And that was also something, you know, you take that very seriously. You want to honor Neil's vision. And it turned out to be one of the best things I've ever worked on. Really loved doing that death short.
I think you did the short of Adam Strange too,
Adam
right?
Strange as well. Yeah, did Death and Adam Strange. That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've loved working on these things. I did a Constantine movie, Constantine City of Demons. That's one of my favorite things I've ever done. So it's been great. And again, going back to what we talked about at the beginning about switching things up. So I'm working on a comic book. Now I'm working on an animated TV show. Now I'm working on an animated movie, you know. I've worked on live action stuff as well over the years, live action TV and movies and stuff. So it's great to mix it up because it keeps you fresh, keeps your imagination young, you know?
Of course. What I most like about this version of Red Sun was that, as you said, it has the same essence of the original, but it's different. It's different, and it has it has a cool ending and a different ending.
Yeah.
But I like it. I think
you know, the comic book ending is big and cosmic and kind of a mind bending and we talked about that, and it just felt like for the purposes of this movie, it was better to end it the way that we ended it, which is great. Mm-hmm. You have the comic book, you have the movie, and they kind of work together. They kind of play off each other, and you can go to both and you can enjoy both. So I know you want to talk about Justice League, though, right?
Yeah. I'm dying.
Okay.
Not us. All of them.
Okay. Well, let's jump in. Let's do it.
Let's go. Let me prepare. Here we go. So, the first thing I would like you to tell it's as Mario said before, is that this Justice League is very important for the Argentinian comic book fans because it gave us a fresh start, point one start to read comics, and it was the first Justice League I read, and the first Justice League of most comic book fans in Argentina. I don't know you, Mario.
Well, you said everything, but it was when I saw the first issue in not in a comic book in a comic book store, because in Argentina before the comic book stores they in the newspaper stores. So we still have the newspaper stores. So they sold the comic books there. And I didn't understand. I recognized Batman and also the Guy Gardner Green Lantern logo for the Green Lantern logo and Shazam because I was 5 years old. So I asked my father, please, Dad, buy me that comic book because they are the Justice League. The Justice League. They call we call here in Argentina before the Justice League Super Friends. So we picked. My father bought me that, and I was thrilled from the first page to the beginning. And I read it, 1, 2, 3 million times, and I loved that.
The great question, I think, it's how Mr. Giffen and you got the pitch for this Justice League, and how you choose these characters to be part of the Justice League.
I had nothing to do with the choice, actually. They had done a mini-series called Legends before this.
Yes.
And then at the end of Legends, they presented a new Justice League at the end of that. So that was set in stone. And I think Keith and Andy, because I wasn't involved with it from the very beginning. I mean, I was involved for the first issue, but when they started developing it, Keith and our editor, Andy Helfer, who was such an important part of that book, another person, just great editor, great guy. He was so important. he kept us all under control. It stopped us from going crazy. So they were presented with this group of characters. And someone asked me recently, so how did you choose Mr. Miracle? To this day, I don't know how Mr. Miracle got in there. Someone at DC said, put Mr. Miracle in there. Or Andy said, can we get one more character? But here's the great thing that happened. Most of the other editors didn't want us to have Superman, Wonder Woman, any of these characters. So we got all these sort of obscure B-list characters from the side, you know, and that allowed us to take this book and make it our own. I had been working on the previous incarnation of the Justice League. Jerry Conway had been writing the Detroit Justice League, and he left the book, and they were going to be wrapping it up. So Andy Helfer asked me, would I do the final arc? It was a 4-issue arc where, you know, Vibe got killed and Steel got killed and all, and it was the end of that Justice League. So I wrote that. I was a huge Justice League fan as a kid, but the Justice League I love, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, you know. So here I am writing Detroit Justice League. That's not the Justice League. and then Andy says to me, you know, originally Keith was going to write the book on his own. And Andy said, you know, Keith was going to write the book on his own. He doesn't feel like he's there yet as a writer, that, you know, he can plot it, but he doesn't think he can write it. And I looked at what Keith had done with the first issue, and I thought, of course he can. But no, they said, no, we need somebody to come in and do the scripting. So I was kind of dragged into it. I wasn't like, oh boy, it was like, and again, this isn't the Justice League. Where's Wonder Woman? Where's Superman? Where's, you know what I mean? It's like they're not. So I don't even think of our Justice League as the traditional Justice League. It's just its own thing. In my mind, it exists in its own universe somewhere. So I kind of got dragged into this gig. I'd never worked with a co-writer before, so I didn't know how that was going to be. And what I discovered as we worked together, as we went along, that Keith, aside from being brilliant, he's just got the most amazing imagination. You know, there are other people in the world that have a great imagination, but nobody has a bigger one than Keith Giffen. He's just amazing. And Keith is a very generous collaborator. So someone else would like turn in a plot and expect me to do exactly what he wants to do in the plot. But Keith and Andy allowed me to play, so that through the dialogue, I could, you know, deepen the characters. I could create whole new plot lines just through the dialogue, through the script. And I would play with the story and add things and change things. And Keith could have said, what are you doing? You're changing my plot. But instead he would be like, that's great. I'm going to take now what you did and build it into my next plot. And he would build from there. And so we always say it was like a game of tennis. He'd hit the ball to me, I'd hit it back. And the stories, what I could do alone, what Keith could do alone, there's something that we do together that we can't do individually, you know? And it created something very unique. There's that chemistry again. And then we were lucky enough in a book that depended so much on character, and again, this is Andy Helfer's genius, to have Kevin Maguire. Kevin was brand new to the business, you know? But if someone else had drawn that book, we might not be sitting here today talking about it. It could have been gone in 6 months because it was so character driven. And here was Kevin, whose art is the art of character, right? Nobody acts on the page like Kevin Maguire characters. His expressions, his gestures, all those things. I mean, Kevin is just amazing. And he's another one. Over the years, if you look at his work now, he's better than ever. He just gets better and better and better. So it was the chemistry between the three of us. It was almost like, and I'm not trying to compare us to the Beatles in any way, shape, or form, but it was like, you know, there were the Beatles, and then there was George Martin, their producer, who was the glue that held the whole thing together and helped them to really achieve at their highest level. And that's what Andy was. Andy was like George Martin, you know, and we were like the Beatles in a very small scale, you know. But so Andy was important. The chemistry between the three of us was so important. And again, you can't control when the magic happens, but something magical happened, and it took me a while. You know, honestly, you know how long it took us to figure out how good it was? It wasn't until 10 years later. 10 years after we finished, when we did formerly known as the Justice League, they got us back together again to do that series. And all of a sudden, the three of us went, there you go. All of a sudden, the three of us went, this is really good. We should keep working together. You know, we didn't realize it then when we were doing it, just how good it was. It was fun. It was another job. But once we got back together, I have continued to work with Keith on and off, you know, all through the years on many, many different projects, and with Kevin as well. So, but it wasn't until then that we kind of went, ooh, we should keep working together. This is really fun, you know. It was a magical, really special gig. Yeah.
Yes, and also the characters are incredible. The villains, oh, because we love that the jokes, and we talk with Kyle everything about this incarnation of the Justice League because it's my favorite. And I love that you used elements from that time about the Cold War, quotes from the United Nations, terrorist groups, uh, the beginning of of a new era, of a new things, new world, because after the fall of the Iron Curtain. So it's amazing that because it's very how you say modern and just in the same time.
Yeah, people forget that.
Up to the minute. Up to the minute.
People forget that, you know, they think of it as the funny Justice League, and there was lots of humor, but there were lots of serious things going on in those stories as well. And it was a nice balance. And sometimes we would lean in really heavily to the funny stuff, and sometimes we want to spin it around and surprise people and lean in heavily into the very dramatic stuff. And, you know, comedy and drama work best when they're side by side. You know, if you have a really funny moment where the readers are laughing at some dumb thing that Blue Beetle and Booster Gold did, and then on the next page, Maxwell Lord gets shot. Whoa, wait, what just happened here? You know, the contrast raises the whole thing up. Yeah. And, you know, we didn't set out, the plan wasn't to do a funny superhero comic. There was no grand vision of what we were going to do. Keith likes to say we had no idea what we were doing, you know, we were just blundering through. But what happened was Keith, by his nature, he's a very funny guy. And so there would be humor in the plots. And so I would pick up on what Keith was doing and I would build on that. I say half jokingly that my job was to take one funny moment that Keith had and repeat it 100 times and keep beating it into the ground, you know? But it just sort of developed naturally. And somewhere along the line, we saw that, and the humor wasn't just jokes. The humor came out of the characters. The humor was the way you'd be with your friends on a Saturday night, just sitting around, goofing around, talking to each other. It was real. It was realistic. And I think in some ways, the humor made those characters not less real, but more real than the standard superheroes. You know, but we didn't plan it. It just sort of happened. And just as I was saying with Kraven, the characters led us on. People always say, you know, Beetle and Booster, did you guys plan to make them this great comedy team? No, we didn't plan anything. Keith put them in a scene together. It was a humorous scene, and I get the characters talking, and they start talking to each other, and you realize, oh, these guys really get along. They really have a nice connection. So the characters tell you. So Beetle and Booster were the ones that told us, yeah, we work really well together. Let's see more of that. So it just developed naturally. Fire and Ice, they broke off into these little subgroups, you know, Max and Oberon, and then they would all interact, and it just happened naturally.
I think, I know, but I'm reading all this stuff. I think Max Lord that you create, this Max Lord is similar to J.R. Ewing.
He's nicer than J.R. Ewing, though, you know?
Yes, he's nicer, but he's behind the things.
Yes, he you know,
operate in the secret.
He was a manipulator, but as you saw as the series went along, you know, in the beginning we found out he was being manipulated by that construct or whatever it was that had used him. But he really came to not just manipulate the League, but to love those guys and to love the work that they did together. And that was the fun of that series, because they all loved to complain and moan and carry on, but they all really loved being there. Even Batman. You know, Batman liked to play it like really straight and serious, but I knew in my heart of hearts that he loved these guys and he loved all their, you know, because where does Batman get a chance to hang around with a bunch of goofy jokesters like this, you know?
He loved to be bossy with Green Lantern, with Guy Gardner.
Yeah.
So I'm just enough with you. Boom.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if he loved Guy Gardner as much, but I'm sure he loved Beetle and Booster and all that, you know, and it was the same thing with the Martian Manhunter. They were both great straight men. You know, all this craziness was going on around them, and they would be the ones that would just be like, you know?
And also the thing of Rambo and things of criticism of Reagan, Reagan administration. So
right.
fun.
Right.
So
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. We always manage to slip in our Ronald Reagan jokes here and there. But you know, it was also done with a light hand, so it didn't feel heavy. It didn't feel heavy.
Of course, of course.
Now you mentioned this humor, this thing. One of the most important things about this Justice League was the humor, and was the most iconic phrases of this league was the "bwah ha ha." Who did come up with it?
We have no idea. So here's the Keith and I will sometimes we'll be at conventions together. We'll get on panels and people will ask us the same question. My answer is Keith came up with it. I saw it in a plot. He just had someone randomly laughing, "bwah ha ha." I thought that was really great, so I kept repeating it. That's my memory. Keith's memory is that I came up with it and he liked it and he kept repeating it. So we don't know. We have no idea which one. And that's the great thing about working on that book. After a certain point, you know, it became like a mind meld between the two of us. And it's not like we were in the same room working together. You know, he was in his house in New Jersey and I was in upstate New York somewhere. But we had that creative chemistry and we became sort of one writer mind between the two of us. And now, these days, after so many years of working with Keith, I can get Keith's plot, take one look at it, and like understand it. You know, it's like it's so intuitive. I don't even have to think about it when I work with Keith. It's very rare that I have to take a step back and figure out how to do a sequence because it's like we have one brain. And I think at this point, either one of us could go off and write a story as if it was written by the both of us because we have merged on that level. You know, we've become that one brain. But it just happened. So I don't know. We have no idea who came up with Wahaha. One of us did, but we're not sure which one of us it was. But that was the fun of it. That was the fun of it.
Of course. It's so enduring and so iconic of this Justice League that I have to ask. I
know we joke that, you know, when the day comes when we finally die, it's going to be Wahaha is going to be engraved on our graves. You know, it's going to.
Can I ask some questions? Okay. About the characters of the Justice League. I'm watching behind you. It's Dr. Fate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's we love Sergio and I. We love Dr. Fate about the JSA and everything. And I want to ask you about the recent news about Pierce Brosnan to play Dr. Fate. What do you think about that?
Oh, I like Pierce Brosnan. It seems like a good piece of casting to me. I assume it must be the Kent Nelson version, the Dr. Fate that I wrote, because while I was doing Justice League, I was also writing the Dr. Fate book, and we created a whole new Dr. Fate, which was a man and a woman that came together to form Dr. Fate. But I assume this is the classic Dr. Fate. I love all the supernatural characters. DC supernatural characters are just fantastic. Yeah, there you see. You know, while we were doing Justice League, we were doing Justice League Europe, we were doing Justice League Quarterly. I was writing all these spin-offs. I was doing Dr. Fate, Martian Manhunter, Mr. Miracle. I was doing a lot of stuff. Justice League basically took up the bulk of my writing life for years, you know, between all these different books. But yeah, I love the supernatural characters. When I was writing a couple of years ago, when I wrote Justice League Dark for DC, where you could use all those characters, I was writing Justice League Dark and Phantom Stranger. I love the so anytime I have a chance to write the supernatural characters, I'm really, really happy. The 2 years that Sean McManus and I did Dr. Fate together, some of my favorite work that I've ever done. I loved working on that. So yeah, I look forward to seeing Dr. Fate come alive on the big screen.
And another question of me, because talking about Justice League from international, because we know like that. What about this Justice League? The other
Justice League Europe.
Europe.
Yeah, that was basically just because the book was, you know, again, you never know when something's going to be a hit or a failure. You have no idea. But that book, for whatever reason, Justice League it took off like a rocket. You know, people loved it. It sold really well. So they wanted to do spin-offs, which is why you saw me doing Dr. Fate and Mr. Miracle and all this stuff, you know. And then someone decided, since it was Justice League International, let's focus on the European branch. And I remember that book came out and it sold like through the roof when it came out. But what happened to me was I only did the first 8 issues. because as you can see from all that other stuff, I was writing so much Justice League that there was just so much I could keep in my brain. Keith plotted it all, you know, I give him all the credit in the world. So I think I did the first 8 issues and maybe a couple of other issues of Justice League Europe. But on our original Justice League, I stayed with it through the end. And then, you know, on the quarterly, I worked on that and all these spin-offs. So basically, it was just the popular demand. That's how Justice League Europe came about. It was like we created our own little imprint within DC, with all these spin-offs and all these different things going on. I think the Justice League International, the quarterlies, were like 80 pages 4 times a year or something. You know, we were cranking out a lot of Justice League, Happily, it was a great gig and it was all fun. So.
Well, you could include here in Europe Wonder Woman and Flash.
Right, that's right. But the joke was always that you know, you're not the real Flash. You know, Barry Allen, he was the real Flash. You know, I love that. That was, you know, I loved that gag. That was just. There's a story that we did. I don't remember it. It might have been in our first or second anniversary, where they're like everybody. They were recruiting new heroes, and so they're all there. It's called Across a Crowded Room. It's one of the best stories Kevin ever did too. And that was the running gag. Green Lantern's there, Elongated Man is there, and they're all like, yeah, well, the real Flash. But wait, I'm standing right here, you know? And they never considered him the real Flash. The real Flash was always Barry Allen to those guys.
Mr. Matteis, what was the character you enjoy writing most?
Oh, God. You know, I loved them all so much. I loved writing Beetle and Booster because it was just, I think they felt Beetle especially felt the closest to myself, you know, and to my friends and my life growing up and the banter between my friends. So they were always fun to write. You know, years later when Keith and I did Justice League 3000 and Justice League 3001, which was set in the future, we made sure that they dug up Beetle and Booster, who were in suspended animation, so we could get them in the book, you know? So I loved them. And Oberon was great. But I loved Martian Manhunter. He's one of my favorite characters. And he was also such a great straight man for the rest of the team, you know? And the Oreos and the whole thing, you know? And that was also, if I remember correctly, just one of those things I just threw in the script as a joke, and then it became a permanent thing, you know? So I loved writing Martian Manhunter, but there was hardly a character in that book that I didn't enjoy writing, really, because it was just fun. You know, Max and Oberon, like I said, had their own chemistry. Fire and Ice were a great team. The relationship between Guy Gardner and Ice, you know, to take this total jerk and this sweet, innocent woman and have them fall in love, you know, which was Keith's idea. A great idea.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. And what do you think about the incarnations of Martian Man, since you mentioned Martian Manhunter, the incarnations in the TV and movies of the Martian Manhunter?
Well, I know the Martian Manhunter has been on. I haven't watched Supergirl the past few seasons, but I watched the first maybe 3-4 years of it, and I loved the Martian Manhunter on that show. I thought that was great because he really is. As the years go by, he's such a great character in so many ways, and really in many ways he may be the most powerful character out of all of them. You know, more than Superman. I mean, if you think of all the things this guy can do, his strength, his invisibility, he's a shapeshifter, he's a telepath, you know? And plus, he's just an interesting guy. So that Martian Manhunter miniseries that you had on the screen before, I really loved working on that because we got to really explore his character and his backstory. And there are elements of that have stayed with the character ever since, you know? The fact that his original Martian form was not what we were seeing. That we created that in that miniseries, and so you'll see him with the more kind of weird, pointy-headed, strange form, which they did in Justice League Unlimited. You know, that was the first time I felt like I got to write the real Justice League, was when I wrote for the animated shows. Finally, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, you know, the Flash. I finally got to write it. But I love all those characters. And you know, so I realized years later that I've had such a long history with Justice League because I got to write Justice League Detroit. I got to write our Justice League. I wrote for Justice League Unlimited. I wrote Justice League Dark. You know, I worked with Bruce Timm on a miniseries called Justice League Gods and Monsters, which was a whole parallel universe version of the Justice League. So I've written a lot of Justice League, and we'll see. There may be some more Justice League in my future, but I won't say anything else beyond that. Just a little tease.
Sweet.
This incarnation, please.
Sweet.
I would, I always say I would work with Keith and Kevin again on anything, anytime. I love those guys and I love working with them. The fun thing in recent years, I've been going to more conventions in recent years, and very often Keith and Kevin will be there. We didn't get to hang out together back in the old days. We would maybe bump into each other up at DC on payday or something, and Andy would take us out to lunch, or Andy would almost have Kevin chained to his desk to get him to get the pages in on time, But now we get to see each other more, at least before COVID, we get to hang out and spend a weekend together, and they'd always put our tables next to each other so we could spend the whole day together, bantering together, just like our characters, So they're both really good people and incredibly talented people. And I would work with them again on anything.
I got a question about something that you didn't wrote, but since you love those characters, it had such an impact on the JLA, and it was this infinite crisis that they all began with destroying this Justice League, killing Beetle, with Max Lord being the bad guy. What do you think of these changes and this thing that they did with the Justice League?
At the time, it probably bothered me at the time because it just didn't register with me. That's not our Maxwell Lord. He wouldn't have never ever done that, and killing off Beetle and all that stuff. But Kevin Maguire put it in a great way. It's like really every writer has their own version of the DC universe. That's like I think the stories I did with Keith, they exist in their own universe. When we did Justice League 3000, we pretended that none of the other stories happened. It was just our original stories and this story. And that series can exist. There's not that the story in itself was just great. It just didn't mesh with my vision of those characters, So go and enjoy that story, and then come back and read our stories. And there's room for all different interpretations of these characters because you're working in a shared universe. So maybe you're going to get annoyed for 5 minutes of what someone else did to your character, but there's a very good chance I've annoyed somebody down the line with what I did to their character. It's just the way, it's just the way it goes. You're all working in the same universe. We're all interpreting and reinterpreting these characters. So you can't get attached to that. You just have to focus on your work and your stories. So regardless of what happened with Maxwell Lord and Beetle, you can still pick up those books and read our stories and read our version of those characters. And that's all that matters, Just like the animated Justice League is a very different universe from the comic book Justice League, but they're great stories. I think Justice League Unlimited is one of the best interpretations of the Justice League that's ever been done, And that exists on its own in its own special place, and that's great. So there's room for all these versions of the characters. I think sometimes we get too attached to the continuity and how could this happen if that happened and this and that. I'd rather just sit back and enjoy the stories, let all the different writers have their chance to tell their stories. Sometimes I'm going to like what they've done. Sometimes I won't. Sometimes they won't like what I've done. Sometimes they will, It's just the way it is when you're all playing in this one very big sandbox together,
No, the cool thing about your Justice League is that made you and Keith won an Eisner for best. I think it's
formerly known as the Justice League. Yeah, we won.
Formerly known.
That's we hadn't worked together in 10 years. We did this story, and who's thinking about an Eisner? And all of a sudden, we ended up winning the Eisner for it, which was great. Really, really great. And it's sitting back over there on my shelf somewhere. Yeah.
This story is like the Justice League taken to another level, to the max humor.
Yeah.
I think Kevin Maguire is in his best. It's one of his best works.
Yeah, I agree.
Expression, with the expression in the faces, and there's the follow up that I can't believe it. It's not the Justice League. It's good. It's good. it's good. But the first one, it's just amazing.
Oh, thank you. I think I might prefer the first one to the second one too. Same thing. I think they're both good, but I really, the fun of that first one was we hadn't worked together in 10 years. So I was a little scared going in. Can we recapture this thing that we had 10 years ago? And what I thought we were actually better than we were 10 years before. And as you say, Kevin was just firing on all thrusters. By that point, sometimes, you'd give Kevin the script, and if Keith had it laid out as 4 panels or 5 panels, Kevin might give 10 panels because he wanted a gesture here, an expression there. He would choreograph the whole thing, in a different way. And he was so good and is so good that he can do that. A lot of artists, you wouldn't trust them to do that, but you can trust Kevin to do that because he's just so damn good. So yeah, that was, like I said, that's the one where we all went, ooh, this is fun. We should do more of this. We went to Marvel and we did the Defenders together. We came back to DC, which not a lot of people know. We did the Metal Men together for a while. We ran in the back of Doom Patrol. We did this like 7 months of Metal Men stories. And of course, Keith and I went on to work on our creator-owned series, Hero Squared, which I don't know if it ever came out in Argentina, but
no,
that's
it came up, but with in Spain, and we received the.
Oh, okay, good. That's one of my favorite things Keith and I have ever done together. Just recently, Keith and I did 3 years of Scooby Apocalypse together. So it's just a great collaboration. It's so much fun to work with those guys, and it's
Gold also.
Booster Gold. Keith and I worked on Booster Gold. That's right, I forgot. So many things over the years, and when I work with them, it's less like work and more like play. It's like we're 3 kids playing together, and frankly, it's comic books. It should feel that way.
You can tell. I can tell that when you read, you can tell when you read the book that you had so much fun doing it as you had reading it. It's amazing. It's an amazing
enjoyable.
work.
It's enjoyable.
And I'm so, like I said several times, you don't think when you're working on something that you're going to be sitting having a conversation about it 30 years later, that people all around the world will be reading it. I go to conventions, there are people that are just reading it for the first time now. They've never read it before and they're discovering it. And then the people that, I meet you guys and you were reading it when you were 5 years old. And it's amazing, to have a project like that lives on and that brings people joy. That's a great thing.
I have a story here called Crime and Punishment about Two-Face.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing, that story, because Two-Face is a personal. It's a person he's very sick because of his accident. So how did you create this story?
It's a bit. We just jumped from Justice League, I guess. Okay.
to the drama, to the complete drama.
I love the villains. If you look at my Spider-Man run, what I really love to do is take these villains, and I always say I want to peel off the top of their heads and get out a flashlight and poke around and find out why they do what they do. What is it with this guy? Why does Kraven put on leopard skin pants and hunt Spider-Man? What is driving Dr. Octopus? What was his childhood like? What made him do this? So the villains are fascinating. And then Two-Face, it's all built in. I love stories about duality. All of us have duality inside us, conflicting things, contradicting things in our souls and psyches. Just look at his face. There's the contradiction right there. And if I remember correctly, Andy Helfer had done a Batman annual exploring Two-Face's background a little bit. And it was a really excellent story. So when they called me to do, it was tying into, I guess there was the Batman movie where Two-Face was in it. So they wanted to do a Two-Face one. And so I took kind of the basic things that Andy did, and I built on that. Because like I said, I love the psychology of these characters. I love the contradiction. I love the duality. And Two-Face is literally about a battle within one person between 2 different impulses. So that was a fun story. And if I remember correctly, Scott McDaniel did the artwork, and really, really excellent artwork. And it was a good story. Really, really nice story.
Really, really.
So ending this interview, we have the subscribers' questions.
Okay, sure.
So here we go. Let's go with a few because we have a lot that we have spoken. about here's one about the Justice League. It says how did it come up the idea of the date between Guy and Ice?
I'm sure that the original idea was Keith's. You know, the fun of the story was sometimes I didn't know what was going to be in the stories until the FedEx man showed up at my house with the plot, and I would read the plot, and it was sometimes Keith wouldn't tell me what's coming up, so I would just get the story and go, okay, fun, and I would just run with it. So for me, the basic idea was Keith's, and then I had the fun of playing with those two characters through their dialogue and evolving their relationship through these crazy dates that they went on. I think they went to the ice capades once, and all these crazy things that went on with the two of them. But it was also a very sweet and touching thing too, because you got to see a different side of Guy Gardner. You know, when a character is only one thing, they get boring. So through the relationship with Ice, we could explore a different side of Guy. He could still go off and be a total jerk, but then you saw that there was more to him than that as well, you know?
Mm-hmm. Another subscriber asked you, what about how was it work in the how was your work in the Clone Saga, Spider-Man Clone Saga?
I'm sorry, say that again. It broke up, so I didn't hear.
How was your work? Sorry, pardon my English. How was it work in the Clone Saga?
Oh, the Clone Saga. That's a
the 90s saga.
It's a long story, but I'll telescope it down. What was great about I'll tell you what was great about the Clone Saga. I was working with a great group of guys. We had Danny Fingeroth was our editor, wonderful assistant editors like Eric Fine and Mark Bernardo. I was working with writers like Tom DeFalco and Howard Mackey, Todd DeZago, Terry Kavanagh. We all really liked each other. We all really respected each other. And, you know, when you're working on books where they're all interlocked like that, you have to work very closely. So we would get together like every 2 weeks up at Marvel, and we would have we'd meet all day. We'd bring in lunch, and we'd sit there, we'd yell and scream and joke and carry on like the Justice League basically all day, and put these stories together. So that was really fun. What wasn't fun for me was, you know, basically I was writing one book out of every month out of a connected story. So you were always writing just one chapter, one sliver of a bigger story. And that got, over time, that got a little frustrating for me. I loved working with those guys. It was really one of the highlights of my career working on the Clone Saga. It was so much fun working with them. But I got a little bored with writing chapter 2. And the other thing that happened is when we planned that story out, we planned it out to be for a set amount of time, 6 months, maybe at most a year. And then we knew what the ending was. Peter and Mary Jane would go off and have their baby and live happily ever after. Ben would step forward as the true Peter Parker, new Spider-Man, new supporting cast, new villains. It was basically a way to do what they do now every 5 minutes, which is do a reboot, you know? But at a time when sales were falling, the Clone Saga was very successful. And my understanding is that the sales and marketing people were like, no, we need more, stretch it out, stretch it out, stretch it out, you know? So at a certain point, I was kind of done with the whole thing and I left, and it went on for a long time after that. And I think that was the problem. Had we done the Clone Saga the way we originally envisioned it, and gotten in and out more quickly, I think it would have worked a lot better. You know, we made our share of mistakes, but there was a lot of great things in those stories. And over the years, all those characters and elements have come back. Kane is back. Ben Reilly is back. You know, all these different villains that we created that... You know, it was sort of like what happened after the Clone Saga was sort of what you're talking about with Identity Crisis or whatever it was, where they wanted to get rid of it all, you know? Let's go. No funny characters here. You know, he said, let's shoot him and let's do this and let's do that. But over the years, all the elements of the Clone Saga have come back, and they're all an important part of the Spider-Man mythology now. So whatever problems there were with that series, and there were always problems, there was some really good stuff in there. And for me personally, Amazing Spider-Man 400 with the death of Aunt May is one of my favorite stories that I've ever written. And I did a mini-series called The Lost Years, which was about Ben Reilly when he was off on his own. I worked with John Romita Jr., the amazing John Romita Jr., and also one of my favorite things. So there were a lot of great... There was this thing that Tom DeFalco and I did with Dr. Octopus called, I think it was Web of Death or Web of Life, Web of Death, where it's the only time I've ever gotten to write Dr. Octopus, and that was a really good. So there was a lot of great stuff in there, and a lot of great characters. The character of Kane, great character, you know. Ben Reilly, I love Ben Reilly as much as I love Peter Parker. Great character, you know. So there was a lot of good that came out of the Clone Saga, and a lot of wrong decisions along the way too.
Another question about Spider-Man.
Okay.
It says, what tips could you give someone to write Peter Parker?
What tips would I give someone? Well, here's the thing about Peter Parker for me, and I think for every writer that writes that character. He's so human. He's so identifiable. You know, when I write Peter Parker, there's something happens with a writer and a character where you sort of merge together, you know? And I put so much of myself into Peter because I relate so much to the character. He's very real. You know, he's very three-dimensional. He's very relatable. He's a regular guy, just like you are, just like I am, you know? So I think the key to writing Peter Parker is to put as much of yourself into Peter Parker as you possibly can. I think that's what, you know, Stan and Ditko and all those guys did. They put themselves into that character. And no matter what your background is, you know, I could talk about my own background and see why I relate to Peter and Aunt May and, you know, elements in my own life. And then you talk to Tom DeFalco or Dan Slott or somebody else, and they see their own lives reflected in Peter. So he's so relatable. And I think that's what makes for a great Spider-Man story, because they're not Spider-Man stories ever. They're Peter Parker stories. Whether he has the mask on or off, it's always about Peter Parker.
And the last one is, what character would you like to write and you didn't have the chance to write yet?
Well, first I'll say I've been very lucky in that I've gotten to write between the comics and the animation, you know, so many of those characters, especially in the DC universe, you know, I've hit almost everybody. But I do love the supernatural characters, so I'm always open for an opportunity to return to that. So there are the favorite characters that I've already written that I'd like to return to. But the answer that I've come up with over the years, and I know Keith and Kevin feel the same way, I would love to do the Fantastic Four with Keith and with Kevin. The three of us doing the Fantastic Four, even just for a mini-series, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or even a one-shot. But I think what we do, because if you look back at the old Lee Kirby Fantastic Four, there's a lot of humor there, but there are also these big cosmic epics. It's all based in character. You know, I think we would have a great time. So that's my answer. If I had to pick one, I'd say get me Giffen and Maguire on Fantastic Four.
Or Challengers of the Unknown.
Right.
Because it's a family also. It's a family.
Yes. With all the bickering and all that, but they all love each other, you know, exactly. It's perfect for us. Absolutely perfect for us.
Here's a short one to end this round.
Okay.
And says, if you know that the next, sorry, I can read the question.
The next animated short?
The next animated short of Showcase at DC, it's starred by Ted Kord, Blue Beetle.
The question is, would I like to do that, you mean?
No, if the next short is gonna be starred by Ted Kord.
It really is gonna be that?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I didn't know that. No, I didn't write that one. I would love to write that.
Oh.
They're doing a Blue Beetle short. Wow, I didn't know that. Wow. You know, I think also... Go ahead.
Sorry. What about the movie that they announced to be a movie about Blue Beetle?
Yeah, you know, a lot of things get announced and even written and never get made. So let's wait and see what happens. But I know that a couple of years ago, and I know the writer, there was a Booster Gold movie in development.
Yeah.
And then I don't know what happened to that. You know, so I think they just announced, but the Blue Beetle movie they announced is not the Ted Kord Blue Beetle.
No, it's the Mexican.
Jaime Reyes.
Yeah, which I understand, because you want to be as diverse as you can. But I think Blue and Gold, I mean, I don't know why there was never a Blue and Gold comic book. A couple of years ago, when Keith and I were doing Justice League 3000 and Justice League 3001, I pitched DC on a Blue and Gold comic spinning out of that. They didn't want to do it.
Do you
I
imagine
It's a series now at HBO Max.
TV
It would
series.
be awesome. It would be a sitcom.
And plus, you've got Booster Gold who can travel through time, so those guys can go anywhere.
Anywhere. And what about a movie about the JLA directed by a guy that I surprised, like James Gunn, like they did the Suicide Squad yesterday.
Oh, he would probably have a good sensibility for JLI. Yeah, he probably would. Yeah, and the same thing. I think when I was writing for the Batman: The Brave and the Bold animated series, and they used the JLI in a number of, and I got to write them in a few episodes. But there was almost a JLI spinoff. They were going to do a JLI animated series. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. Almost, but not quite. But I would, why not a JLI animated movie? Take formerly known as the Justice League.
Of course.
Yeah.
And do an animated movie. 90 minutes, it would be great. So, unfortunately, I'm not the guy that makes those decisions. They call me up and they tell me what the movie is. You know what I mean? So if I could make the decision, I would say tomorrow, let's do a JLI animated movie.
So Warner has to hire us to be the executives.
Right. That's right.
Well, Mr. De Matteis, we're ending the interview. I would like to thank you a lot for being so kind, answering all our questions, all our subscribers' questions, and for being here for us.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure. I'm happy to do it.
It's a great pleasure to have you here because you are unreachable for us if you couldn't be for the technology.
Yeah, isn't it great that we live in the world where we have this technology that we could be sitting and talking like this? It's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
I keep thinking, imagine if this pandemic happened without all the technology that we have. How even more isolated we'd be feeling right now,
Totally.
But that we can sit and do this is great. It's great. It's delightful for me to be able to reach across the world to people that have read my work and enjoy it. I'm very grateful.
I must say, sir, that I'm have a lot of feelings right now. I'm not going to cry, but
don't cry, Mario. Don't cry, Mario. Don't cry, Mario.
It's a lot of memories about this, and I still love the work. And I hope, sir, you came to Argentina after the pandemic, and can we talk and have a cup of coffee?
That would be right. Wouldn't that be amazing?
When we have celebrations, we do barbecues, big ones. So we love that.
All right, I'm just going to come for the food then, right? I look forward to the day when we don't have to deal with this and we can get back to something resembling a normal life. Because, like I said, one of the fun things in recent years has been a chance to go to these international conventions. And what a delight it would be to come down there and meet people in person. Be great. And eat your good food.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr.
Thank you.
Matteis.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's listening. I appreciate it.
We're going to say goodbye to the subscribers and the interview. Gente, muchísimas gracias. Gracias por estar ahí. Gracias. Por las preguntas, por el apoyo. Ya saben, suscríbanse al canal, dejen su like. Todo eso que les estoy diciendo ayuda a traer este material de calidad y ayuda a apoyar el canal para poder traer a gente como el señor De Matteis acá. Así que muchísimas gracias y nos estamos viendo, gente. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.